Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to Beyond Compliance. My name is Jim Albright, and you've come to the right place to hear about what influences, challenges, impacts, and solutions are facing the process manufacturing industry today. Now, I know some of you are new to the series, but Beyond Compliance provides regular updates to QA, safety, compliance, operations, and business leaders who come here to learn from manufacturing industry experts like the one we have on today on methods, tools, and processes that they can use to consistently and efficiently deliver quality products to their customers. And one of the key benefits of attendees like you get the chance to actually take part in the discussion through your comments and questions. So in case you missed it, this series is hosted by SafetyChain. They're the makers of a holistic plant management platform that's designed to unite plant production, quality, and compliance together to improve yield, maximize productivity, and ensure compliance. It is very cool, let me tell you. All right, so before we get started, I just need to let you know that we have muted all attendee mics, but please do submit your comments and questions using the webinar panel at any time during the session. And of course, we're gonna do our very best to get through them all at the Q&A section at the end. We've scheduled about an hour for the session, but if we do run out of time and your question wasn't addressed during Q&A, fear not, we'll be sure to follow up with you afterwards. And oh yes, this session is being recorded, and we absolutely will send you the link to the recording and the presentation slides later today. So I'm really excited to introduce today's speaker. We have with us Dr. Lone Jespersen, who's the founder and principal over at Cultivate. They're a firm which helps food manufacturers around the world make safe, great tasting food by driving continuous culture of food safety throughout their entire organization. That's why we're all here today, right? Lone has not only been a top speaker on this series, Beyond Compliance, but she frequently speaks at global food safety events. She's authored published studies around food safety culture and has even chaired working groups such as within GFSI. So Lone, we're happy to have you back to Beyond Compliance. And why don't we start off by giving a little background before we get into your presentation.
Thank you so much, Jim. And thank you to SafetyChain for this wonderful opportunity. I really enjoy every time we get together to share a little bit of the progress, what's happened around this topic that we're also interested in around culture and how to improve food safety. I had the wonderful opportunity to work with Maple Leaf for 11 years and really learned from Dr. Randy Hoffman about food safety beyond compliance, because Randy is very much one that looks forward in a proactive way. I've also had the pleasure of doing my PhD at the University of Guelph in Canada when we lived there under the supervision of Dr. Menzel Griffiths. So this is a topic that's incredibly personal to me when we talk about food safety culture, and especially when we talk about how we can better manage food safety risks, because we're more aware of the silos that we have in most food businesses. So what do you say, Jim? Should we share a couple of thoughts and see what kind of questions that our audience have?
Absolutely. Let's go right into it. Oh, but wait, first we've got to find out who this person is. Who's Anna?
Yeah, so let me share a little bit about Anna. So I have the pleasure of working with Quick Trip and know Dr. Jay Ellingson very well, who is heading up food safety and quality at Quick Trip. And I was picking up my husband at O'Hare Airport. We were driving up to an event in Wisconsin. And on the way, he was terribly hungry. And some people might actually argue that he was a tiny bit hangry. And we drove past a newly opened Quick Trip store. And I'm probably a little too curious when it comes to going into a store or factory or restaurant. So I'm going up to this hot counter that Anna is standing in front of, and these little thermometers were in each and every shelf that Anna is stacking product into. And I asked her, so what is this? And 20 minutes later, my husband has now eaten his breakfast. He's no longer hungry, and Anna is still explaining to me why temperature of food is important. I wanted to share that story today because, one, I think it says a lot about the Quick Trip culture, and how Don, their CEO and president, has set the tone for where food safety fits into the operation at Quick Trip. But it also says a lot about the topic that we're here to talk about, because Anna is not a food safety expert. Anna is not, she doesn't have a microbiology background. She's really good at communicating with customers. She's very passionate about the Quick Trip brand, and she knows exactly how to keep food safe in their stores. To me, this is really what it comes down to when we're talking about culture, and we're talking about making sure we don't have silos that add risks to what we do every day. It's about making sure you have as many Annas in your factories, in your stores, in your restaurants that you can possibly have. It's a great leading indicator for your culture, if you ask me.
That's a fantastic story. I love that you started off with this story. All right, let's dive in.
Super. So let's just roll back a little bit and take a macro view to culture. And I'm a big fan of trying to see where we can connect culture in general to financial performance, be that revenue growth, as in growth in this example. It is a study that came out from Cutter and Heskett, and it's still very valid, because if you just step back and look at it, what it essentially tells us is that if you have a performance enhancing culture, then the percentage of growth that you see in revenue, employees, stock price, and net income is significantly higher than if you have a non-performance enhancing culture. And they go into, in Cutter and Heskett's work, much more about what is a performance enhancing culture. But amongst others, it's about making sure that the entire company is pulling towards the goals and visions of the company. And I think as we talk about the topic today around risks and silos in the food industry or in your food business, it's important to just bring it back to, okay, we can actually, by making changes to the organizational culture in general, see some significant improvements in the performance, financial performance of the organization. If we then take that and then look a little bit at some of the studies or the data that we've been collecting at Cultivate since 2013, we start seeing some patterns across companies. One is that there's this difference in functional perceptions of how mature your food safety culture is. And especially we keep seeing this discrepancy between how mature the food safety and quality organization or professionals think it is compared to manufacturing and support staff. So professionals in food safety see their, on average, their food safety culture as 23% more mature than those in other functions. What does that mean? Well, it means that you might be more personally connected to food safety and quality. I certainly believe that you are if you're a professional food safety and quality person. But that also means that you have a different perception. You're biased a little bit towards thinking that it's more mature sometimes than it actually is, if you compare to your other functional colleagues. It's something to be aware of, because again, culture is anything but homogeneous. It varies across functions. Now, we also see this if we look at span of control. And this is across, we have about 120 companies, close to 4,000 plants now. And what we see with span of control is that there's also a difference where leaders and executives are estimating that their culture is 36% more mature than if you are a supervisor. And that to me is just really important to just really grab a hold of. You don't need to assess your own culture to use this. You can really go tomorrow to your leaders and say, hey, what makes us different than 120 other companies? And if it were not, then you're likely more positive around our culture than what our frontline teams are seeing. And you need to look at culture as it's only as strong as your weakest link. So if your supervisors are seeing that it's a little bit more immature, or in this case, actually a full stage down on our maturity model, then you got to go with that result and then make sure that your leaders are actually understanding the discrepancy so that your supervisors can get the best tools possible to do their job every day. We also see a gap or a silo, if you like, in knowledge. So last year we asked well, 524 companies. We polled them to say whether their 10 most senior leaders knew their food safety risks in their companies, and 48% said yes. So essentially, this means that about half of you on this call might be in a situation where your senior leaders know your food safety risks, and therefore they can help you if you are food safety professionals, if you're in operations and others, they can help you drive towards that food safety vision a little stronger because they know what risks you're dealing with every day. If you're in the 52% that don't know, then you have a little bit of work to do to say, okay, let's try and educate everybody on what are our risks, why should leaders take it personal, and also what is it that they can do or need to do different from a behavioral perspective, such as when they prioritize, when they put resources towards food safety compared to what they do today. But we'd like to actually add your responses to this pool of companies. And Jim, I'd love to ask our participants today whether their 10 most senior leaders know about their food safety risks. What do you think?
Yeah, let's do it. All right, attendees, this is your time. Let's hear what you have to say. I'm going to hold this poll open for about 30 seconds. Let's get some votes in. Oh, wow. Lots of people voting. All right, here we go. Let's give it a few more seconds. All right, we're going to close it down. Let's see the results.
Look at that.
Surprising? Yeah.
So we have some more educated leaders on this particular companies, leaders in companies that are on this webinar, which pleases me, cold Danish heart, I can tell you that. Because we all know that it's about making sure that our senior leaders have as strong an understanding, regardless of what function they're in, about the risks that they're dealing with every day. So let's look at how you can continue to build on that great knowledge. If we look at, there we go. If we look at culture dimensions, this might be old news to some of you, but let's just recap it. It's the same dimensions that we have in the GFSI position paper. 5 dimensions to food safety culture. Your leaders are setting the vision and mission, living by that when they do strategic planning and also resource allocations, etc., and prioritizations. We have the people dimension, which obviously is around learning, education, managing consequences, adaptability. How do you manage change? Are you proactive in the change? Do you involve your frontline team members in your HACCP team members or meetings so that you can get that fresh off the line view on risks and hazards in your company so that you can manage change around that? Consistency, a lot to do with data. Obviously, the systems like SafetyChains where you can get everything integrated so that it's less about the human interactions in both your data and your systems, but it's there to prompt you and nudge you to behave in a certain way instead. Then we have hazards and risk awareness, which is obviously around what we just talked about with your leaders. Does everybody from the senior leader to the front line know about your food safety risks specific in your company? So that you put all eyes on food safety every day. That's really what we want to see. If we then take the dimensions and then look at this new exciting platform I want to introduce to all of you today, Cultivate Pulse. Cultivate Pulse uses technology. It's a technology platform where it really operates on this notion of one. Every day, everybody is asked to answer one question using a tablet like the one you see here. There's 5 smiley faces, and every week there's one insight for a supervisory team to then act on. There's one action to be delivered as well. So we're really building on this short-term change cycle when using Pulse, as opposed to that we do one action plan per year to change our food safety culture. And it's all real-time data that you can track participation and how mature your culture is. The interesting thing about Pulse as a platform as well is that we can see how, back to the 5 dimensions, that there's a difference in across all of the companies running Pulse today as for how mature they are in these dimensions. We have 4 dimensions in Pulse. We've tried to minimize or simplify a little bit. And as you can see, the lowest maturity across all of these companies that are running Pulse today is in the adaptability dimension. Then if we look at breaking that a little bit more down, we can see that it's especially in and around the invest focus area that there's some improvement needed. And we can also see that there's a little bit in the people dimension around recognition. On the flip side of that, a very strong and high perception of culture when it comes to values and mission, especially with the commitment. And that might be the same that we're seeing in your companies here. That there's a lot of your senior leaders that know your food safety risks, and therefore there tends to also be a stronger commitment to food safety. Courage is big across this group as well, so having the courage to speak up, to say no, to question, to challenge, so that we challenge internally every day as opposed to having to have the courage to deal with something that went wrong. And then of course setting expectations is high here as well. So with Pulse, we can run these types of analyses every day with live data to see where are the biggest opportunities for improvements and what's that one action that your company should be taking next week, and then follow up on that. What we can also do with Pulse is we can split it across functional areas, and that's relevant for what we're talking about here today. So I've just grabbed a snapshot here for the values and mission dimension that you saw was very positive. When we then start to dive into the functional areas, we can see there's quite a discrepancy. So operations, engineering, they're sort of we're halfway on the maturity model, which means that, yeah, we know about food safety, we can take action on it, but it's not totally ingrained in what we're doing every day. Then we would see a green, much more green in operations, we would see more green in engineering as well. And if we then go further over, we can see in product development that we have around courage. We're just not thinking that we're very courageous in organizations. So it might actually be that I feel as a product developer that I can speak up, but nobody wants to listen, or when I speak up, it doesn't really matter. So this is just a wonderful tool for you also to start to look at where are those silos and what is it that you need to hone in on when it comes to these different functional areas, to make sure that ultimately what we're looking at right now is bright, bright green, right? So that everybody has the same perception of your food safety culture. So if we're then looking at the silos that we know exist in all companies, and the degree, the magnitude of those as for how they influence your culture varies, of course, but let's connect those to risks. And one of the values that I bump into a lot with food companies is this value around that everybody is responsible for food safety. Personally, I think it's a little bit, it lacks a little courage, if you're asking me, because everybody is responsible for food safety is sort of a given in my world, because if you're in the food industry, food safety is part of your business success, or the vice versa, right? So some of the assumptions that some senior leaders are making in immature cultures is that I'm a CEO. That means that I will listen and I will speak when I'm asked to do that for food safety. It's not something that necessarily is just part of what I do every day, or when I message my organization. In operations, I'll make the product as specified. That's the cultural assumptions. And it might be in this middle sort of maturity stage 2 or 3 that finance, we hear this a lot. When we interview people in finance, we're not actually directly involved in food safety, which I think is a big miss. In sales, we often hear that we connect FSQA and customers, but that's really the extent of our involvement in food safety. And then we go to product development, where it's food safety and quality assurance will let us know if there's anything we need to do different. So in a stage 2 to 3, sort of starting to middle mature food safety culture, these are typical assumptions that we bump into. So if we're looking at those and we're saying, so we know that there's a connection between behavior and the hazards that we're dealing with every day in food safety. And if we put those together, that's really when we can start to look at magnitude of risk. So before, with the assumptions that we heard, so operations will do what we're told, sales will be the connecting point, but not really sort of very proactive behaviors that influences the magnitude of your food safety risks. And I'll tell you why. When we're looking at hazards, we all know these are traditional from our hazard systems. There's nothing new in that. Our physical hazards, our biological, our chemical. We bring it sort of right back to hazards when we're talking about how behaviors influence our risks. And then we can look at behaviors as well. And I love this ABC model from Braxic. Encourage all of you to read her work if you have the opportunity and time to do so, because it's a very simple model that says we behave in a certain way because we have some antecedents or triggers, where we've learned what's expected of us, that tells us what to be reminded of, and that we have in our job descriptions, we have a license to drive a car, or we have a certificate to be able to run a certain piece of equipment. So those are all antecedents that help us understand and set us up for how we're supposed to behave. Then we have these consequences over on the other side, and that's what we experience as an immediate outcome of a behavior. So if I'm back to Anna, if I'm Anna and I meet somebody like this pesky Dane that's now in there asking all sorts of questions about her thermometers and the hot counter, her behavior of explaining to me as for why this is important, the immediate consequence for her in this case was me as a customer. I was over the moon and I praised her, and I just couldn't believe what I was hearing from such an educated and passionate person as Anna was. So that's what she experiences immediately based on her behavior. So the ABC model is really super simple, but still we need to just remember that about 20% of the reasons that we behave comes from the antecedents, and about 80% comes from the consequences. And sometimes we get this the other way around when we design training programs. So you all know we hear this a lot. Let's retrain. Let's make sure that everybody knows what they're supposed to know. If there's been an issue, when sometimes we should look at the consequences instead. So if there's been an error happening, if somebody has handled food they weren't supposed to, or if there's been a lack of a maintenance step and therefore now we have foreign material in our products, well, is it really about retraining, or could it be that when I do this type of maintenance, I don't have the right tools and therefore I have to improvise, and the consequences of my improvising is that 9 out of 10 times it is right, and therefore we're up and running, but there is that one time when it might go wrong and we have foreign material in our product. So the consequences of my behavior is on most days that we get up and running and I've done my job the way I'm supposed to. So there's an increased focus needed on consequences, and we need to talk more about that. So now we've talked about hazards, we've talked about behaviors, what drives behaviors. Let's try and put that together. A behavior in itself, if you want to define behaviors that are not just tasks, behaviors are observable, and they have a time factor. So in other words, every day I wash my hands, or when I leave the lunchroom, I wash my hands before I enter into the high care area. And also we attach a reason why. So an observable behavior could be every time we connect with our customer, I review the key account manager's FSQA feedback. So every time is the time factor, and it's something that we can observe because I can see the head of sales actually doing this review and feedback. The reason why can be twofold. One can be because I have to, or the other one can be because I control that the food is safe. In other words, as a head of sales, I'm connecting my behavior to the fact that I do my bit to make sure we make safe food, because I have this review with my key account managers and around FSQA feedback. On the other hand, if I have to do this because somebody has said to me, you have to do it, there's a difference in my perception as for how important that behavior is. So now we have the hazards, we have the behaviors. Now let's put them together so we can actually get into food safety risk analysis. This is all news to most of you, I'm absolutely certain. You know, we have severity, we can't do much about severity. If we have a biological contaminant in any of our products, then it can range from fatality to an insignificant. If we have foreign material contamination, it can cause serious illness or in worst case a fatality as well. But severity is really not something that we have control over when it comes to a hazard. We do, however, have control over likelihood. And it's when we talk about likelihood as from a common occurrence all the way to that it's practically impossible that this particular hazard will be introduced and therefore cause a risk to our food safety. It's when we talk about likelihood that we start to connect hazards and behavior. Because if we go back to the behavior we looked at before, every time we connect with our customer, I review the key account managers, FSQA feedback, because I have to, it might actually bump this particular risk up to a could occur on the likelihood scale. Because there's less likelihood of me actually doing the behavior or understanding the significance of it, and therefore maybe not doing it quite as well. So my attitude might be one of, yeah, I'm going to put a check in the box. I might not perceive that I have very much control over what the outcomes of this review leads to, or I might also be in a social setting where nobody really cares. Nobody ever asks me for this particular, whether I do this connection with my key account managers, and therefore the risk goes up for some of these hazards. Whereas if I actually have a good connection to that, I control that the food is safe, it might be that it's practically impossible for this particular hazard that we're reviewing to occur. So the likelihood is very low, and therefore now the risk is lower as well. So I'd really like all of you just to consider this concept of where we say we're very good at doing hazard analysis. We've done that for centuries, or maybe it's decades. But we have a risk analysis that is known to many of us as food safety professionals, but very rarely do I see when we go out and Cultivate and do assessments that people actually connect that hazard analysis to human behavior. And do you know what, Jim? I would really love to hear from our participants here today as for whether they include assessment of human behaviors into their hazard analysis.
Yeah, that's a great question. Let's launch that poll right now.
Great.
All right, voters. Yeah, there's some interesting points you've been bringing up and been taking a bunch of notes here. And again, I love how you started off, you kind of set the tone with everybody should be the Anna. I know we'll get into the Q&A later on, but just really, really loving this presentation as I'm learning just along with everybody else on this call. All right, looks like we've got a good amount of folks here. I'm going to close the poll out and let's see the results.
Sounds good, Jim. Yeah. I have to say I really like this group of participants. I wish I knew more about you, because I think you are ahead of the curve when it comes to your senior leaders and knowing your food safety risks. And now you might be at the step where you need to start bringing in that behavioral aspect into some of your existing food safety systems, like hazard. And so thank you so much for your directness in this. I really appreciate that. So we talked about why food safety silos or the magnitude of silos, both from a functional perspective, span of control, and also leaders understanding risks. We've talked a little bit about what is food safety culture from the 5 dimensions perspective and how you can measure your maturity against that with Cultivate Pulse. We've also talked a little bit about, so how do we connect hazards, behaviors, so that we can assess our risks around food safety, both from a systemic perspective and also from a human behavior. So I'm thinking that we could look a little bit at what's causing some of these silos, in the spirit of just highlighting some of the root cause for this. So we've really come across mostly 3 reasons for this. One is knowledge and expectations, which goes back to the A and the ABC, but it also goes back to that 52% of the companies that we polled on the senior leaders understanding risks. I find that we still have a need in food safety to find ways to communicate our food safety risks in a way that our business leaders can absorb, and also that it fits into their what they do every day. And I think that one of the best ways to do that is to bring them into a group setting where we're learning together, so that we're starting to develop some of that common language. And I'll give you a little bit of a sneak peek on some work that we've been doing that might help you with that in a second. Then there's definitely this gap that's caused by competing performance measures. So do you have a set of performance measures? It doesn't matter if you're in retail or in manufacturing or in agriculture, but is there a performance measure around food safety that sits right at the top of your business performance measures? So does it sit there with the revenue, with your people retention these days? That's certainly a big topic for all of us. With your safety, with your sustainability measures, so that across those 5 measures, your leaders see them as equal. And I have a little bit of an allergic reaction to senior leaders that stand up and say that something is their number 1 priority, and that includes when they do that for food safety, because I think it's really putting other leaders a little bit in a predicament, because you can't possibly run a successful business by focusing on one thing. What you need is a culture that is adaptable and consistent at the same time, a sort of tug of war there, enough to say that we have these 5 measures and they're equally important for what we are doing in our business, and we're going to let them inform us as for how we are doing in each of these 5 disciplines, and then also help us when we need to make decisions that could influence one over the other. And that discussion around what are those key performance measures that are important to successful food business, I think is one that many companies are need to have, and make sure that again it's a balanced view when we look at what is important to measure so that your business can continue to be successful on all accounts. Another reason for this gap between functions, these silos, is our psychological heuristics and biases. I know that's a bit of a mouthful, but it really comes down to that it's human to be biased. One of the things that should be eliminated from the vocabulary is unbiased, because we run around, all of us as human beings, with these psychological heuristics that help us to make decisions without having to consciously think about it. So it's these unconscious biases that we have in our heads. They're neurological pathways that help us take in all of this information that come at us every day, and yet make some decisions without imploding. So for example, you put on your pants every day. You don't think about how you do that. You might also not think about how you put one foot in front of the other to take a step or go out for a run. So we have all of these psychological heuristics that happen in our head ongoingly. For example, if we're looking at food safety, anchoring is one of these psychological heuristics. Anchoring is all about our perception of numbers, and a theory around anchoring really says that most of us are we're a little illiterate when it comes to numbers. We're not terribly good at absorbing numbers and what they truly mean, and therefore we make these shortcuts. So we see a percentage positives of 0.1%. It's an incredibly small number, and therefore if I'm not in food safety, I might actually look at that incredibly small number of 0.1% and say, therefore it can't be a problem, because maybe at the same time our sales are down 7%, much higher number. While those can't obviously be compared in risks nor magnitude, if you're not a food safety professional, some of these psychological heuristics will make some of these decisions for you, and therefore you might not take the actions or see the seriousness in some of these food safety data or challenges in the case of anchoring. We have a white paper out, it's Human to be Biased. Happy to share that with anybody that wants to know more. But these biases are really creating some of these gaps that we're seeing between functions as well, and causing some of these silos. So the first thing around knowledge, I just have to share this with you as we go through that first one, because we have the attention span that's shorter than a goldfish, and apparently Google has measured that. Don't ask me how they measured the attention span of a goldfish. I have no idea. However, the point being that you can educate your different colleagues in the different functions and the different areas, but you got to just remember that unless we use a lot of our knowledge, then we are not actually going to retain it. And that's why I want to this is your public service announcement. I want you to be aware of that we're just finishing the course on food safety culture with Alchemy, and I know that lots of you are using Alchemy out there. And it's very unique in that it is an introduction, and it comes down to that you can sit with your team, go through this course, and everybody can start learning about food safety culture in the same language. It has some very fundamental tools in there and a case study, and it's got this gauge that you can use to ask some questions as a team, answer them, and then it'll lead you to some custom tool recommendations specific to your situation. Scan the QR code if you're interested in, and there might be a complimentary course coming your way. But again, not really big on necessarily pushing commercial tools on this webinar or any other webinars, but this is a really unique tool that you can sit with your team and close that first gap, which is that we just don't have the same knowledge when it comes to food safety and how it ties into what we do as an organization. So in wrapping up, because Jim, I really want to get to questions with everybody, since that's far more interesting, I think, than just listening to one person talk. But I want to leave you with this that you can try tomorrow. We looked at these roles, different functional areas, where we sometimes see silos appearing between them. And if we take this to the next stage of maturity, so the first set of assumptions we looked at were very immature, but in a mature culture, you might actually see a CEO schedule workout sessions. So this is an old phenomenon that came out of GE, and it means that senior leader sits down, have a conversation with a group of people in let's say a food manufacturing location or in a restaurant, and the whole purpose is that you get to ask all of the questions you want of your CEO, and the CEO has to make decisions on the spot. It's a very interesting structure, and I think it makes for a really good connection between leaders and also those that are in the field every day. Then we have operations. Well, maybe you want to see operations become a little bit more of supervisor or coaches for supervisors, and also supervisors coaching. So instead of having FSQA be the coaches on food safety, wouldn't it be grand if we had all of your supervisors do that? From a finance perspective, I'm a firm believer that finance are uniquely positioned to do risk assessments. So when we look at doing risk assessments for food safety, why not have finance take that part of the food safety job, and then also be able to roll that in with the other risks that your company might be dealing with. Sales, I don't know about you, but many salespeople are incredibly good at speaking. Many of them are also very good at listening. And we have a number of clients where it's actually sales that have taken the accountability for food safety and communication, because they have some creative ways of communicating. They can reach people in a different way than many of us in food safety and quality can. And that's okay. That's good for all of us. And therefore, I think an action from sales could be very much around internal communication. And then when we look at product management or product development, sorry, risk management fits right to that particular function as they look at new products, finding ways to manage food safety risks in the inception, in the ideation stages, as opposed to when we are actually about to launch the product. So wanted to leave this with you just because I think it's a way to say what could some of these cultural actions be across the different areas that we sometimes see silos in. And how are they different from the ones that we might see in an immature culture. We've got these cheat sheets that can help you drive some functional conversations as well, and we're happy to share those with you. Just shoot me an email and we'll get them over to you. The way they work is that for each function, in this case we're looking at one here for human resources, we have defined with some of our clients what's the responsibility for food safety in HR and what might be some aspirational behaviors. You can take this cheat sheet and then you can sit down and you can have a conversation with your functional leader, in this case head of HR, and say, hey, this is what it could look like. What do you think it should be? And then get feedback, revise the cheat sheet, and then you are essentially creating a bit of an expectation agreement with your function and FSQA. So it's just a way to help others outside the function of FSQA that understand what they can do for food safety and build it into their areas of expertise. With that, I'm going to wrap it up, Jim, and want to just end on this fabulous quote that I learned about from Cargill, that changing culture, creating as many Annas as you possibly can in your organization is not easy. And it takes an awful lot of effort, and sometimes you're the ones that carry all of the water on that. Just think about that every day when you make decisions around food safety and you help another Anna see the light, you're saving lives, because it's about making sure that as many people can look at your food that we all enjoy every day as safe, great tasting food, and they can continue to do that. And with that, I'm going to hand it back over to you, Jim, and see what we have for questions.
All right, Lone, you can't see it, but I'm giving you a standing ovation right now. That was amazing. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. I really did learn a lot here, and this is not an easy topic. This is something I think a lot of folks are really trying to make a priority, but it's just tough to keep it top of mind when, you know, the rubber meets the road, or, you know, the fires start, not literal fires, hopefully, but fires start, you know, on the plant floor, and you're trying to, you know, troubleshoot all day long. Food safety has to be that priority and just be top of mind. So you gave some really, really good examples, and obviously some resources that we'll be happy to share after this webinar as well. I'm just curious, overall, when you walk into a facility and you run the test, maybe it's through that that Pulse software that you shared with us earlier, where are generally people at? I'm assuming it's at the low end in terms of their food safety maturity level. Is that fair to say?
Well, across 100, and so we've got 122 companies in our database now, and the average maturity level it has dropped a little bit over the last year, but it's about 3.05. So it's that's the average. But then, of course, we have a good number of companies on the other side of that. It follows a very beautiful normal distribution. And I will say that I think we also need to see that number in the light of that if you decided to make an investment in something like Pulse, that means that you have decided to do something about your culture. So you are in essence the enlightened ones, right? And I think we've grown a lot as an industry globally over the last 7 years when it comes to the topic of how to improve food safety through our business cultures. we still have a ways to go. And the biggest challenge I can see for all of us right now is that we keep the momentum. If stage 3 is an okay place to be, it's not the end point. Because if you end in a stage 3, that means that you have some good knowledge. And as you saw in the ABC model, it's not necessarily the knowledge that has the biggest influence on how we behave every day. It is down to the consequences. So you really want to get into that stages, or those stages 4 and 5, to manage consequences consistently, and the positive and negative, right? So let's keep that in mind as well.
Yeah. All right, I'm consolidating a few of these questions here, but I think the sentiment is the same. So roughly, what's your recommendation in terms of how to go about training the different functions within an organization? So we're talking about time frames. So you shared that one graph, right? So I think it was, what, 8 weeks after you learned something, you pretty much forgot everything you've learned, or 6 weeks, was it? What's the frequency, the timing? Obviously, people on an individual basis learn differently. So are there any tips and tricks you can offer?
I think first and foremost, before you even start training, I think you have to find a way to incorporate a food safety expectations into the functions that you're training. So if you blanket go out and say, let's sit down and let's do this fabulous course, and we all now have learned something, and we walk away, then it runs the potential fate, as you saw in the forgetting curve. I think first and foremost, you need to say, if I am in HR, then the expectations, for example, is that I'm in HR, I'm the head of HR, I am taking over all FSQA learning. So I'm responsible for learning. I need to make sure everybody in my company understands what they need to do with food safety. So now there's an expectation that HR has a specific food safety responsibility. Now you can start, in my mind, training them then on, so what is food safety? So let's talk about what are the risks that we deal with in our company. And we can start talking about in workshops, how do HR now influence the magnitude of risk? I think it's important to look at one blended learning. So do webinars, do a micro learning over here, set an expectation here that you then workshop with HR, so that everybody has a chance to best integrate what they've learned into what they do every day. Because if we just keep training people on something more generic, then all you might be doing is educating your employees for somebody else. And that's not really very, it's not very productive for you, obviously, and it's not necessarily changing your food safety performance either, which is why we're talking about this in the first place. So I hope that makes sense, Jim.
Yeah, I think so. And again, I know every plan's different. Every company, has their own culture, and this is something that needs to be part of that culture throughout all the departments. You made a comment earlier where you said, hey, nobody asked me if I'm having a conversation with a key account manager. So to me, this just sounds like, hey, just bake this into your daily process or your weekly process or whatever that looks like. It has to be another, I don't want to call it checklist item, but it's got to be baked into your culture through a more programmatic format. Is that fair to say? Yeah.
Yeah, it's very fair, and I think lots are on the way to doing that as well. So we're seeing great movement in that general direction. But it's also, I think, important that we say, while we are food safety professionals, we don't necessarily have the understanding of how food safety is best built into these other functional areas, and that's why we created these cheat sheets, because while we don't necessarily know how best to build food safety into a sales department, sales doesn't necessarily know food safety. So the cheat sheets are sort of becoming a bit of a discussion point between the two to say, could it look something like this? And once we've then agreed on what are those expectations, what are the food safety responsibilities for sales, and what are the aspirational behaviors, then we can say, okay, now we can actually measure on that on an ongoing basis. So you can do internal audits on it, you can do internal behavioral observations on it, you can do all sorts of things. But you've now set the expectations. You can start doing some of these other types of learning, so make sure people have some context. But I would really start there, because as you saw in the statistics I shared in the beginning, there are gaps between both the front and top of the organization, and also between functional areas. But unless we clearly help each other articulate what are the expectations and come to an agreement on what that looks like, write it down, put it into your system, to your point, Jim, systematize it. And it just becomes another antecedent, the A with no C, if I can put it that way.
Yeah, exactly. So just going off, you talk a lot about this human nature of bias. And you said, I think at the beginning, where, hey, you think you're actually more mature in your food safety culture than you actually are. Is that really because you don't have visibility to some of those KPIs, or you're not aligned on some of those KPIs?
Could be. It could also be that the KPIs are not necessarily designed to drive the behaviors that you're looking for.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Because if we look at some traditional KPIs like customer complaints and audit scores, I'm not necessarily sure they're very conducive for driving the behaviors that we've just talked about. I think if you had your internal audit, do a section in there around how does your HR department deliver on their expectations, for the expectations of them for food safety, and how does that internal audit score roll up into your, as I said, with that balanced view across performance measures. Maybe the audit score is one that lands at the top of that pile and sits at par with safety and performance and financial performance. I think your KPIs become more meaningful because now it's actually about the business success, and it just happens to include food safety. I also think just on the notion of KPIs, we also have to acknowledge that we work with a maturity model that has 5 stages, and the 5 stages, there are different food safety KPIs for each of those 5 stages, because in a stage 2 or 1, it actually does make sense to look at audit performance. But if you get into stage 3, where you have much stronger knowledge around food safety across your business, you're seeing more proactive behaviors. Audit scores, external audit scores, doesn't drive the behaviors you're looking for. It's not a great measure. So you have to look at how mature is your culture today, and what are therefore the metrics or KPIs that are more suitable for driving your organizational culture to the next stage.
Is that a struggle, though, for some organizations to realize these are the right types of KPIs that ensures that we are practicing a mature food safety culture? Is that hard for folks from different departments to sit around a table and align on those types of metrics?
Yeah, I would say so.
Yeah.
I would say so, and it's I also think that it's a little bit back to the heuristics and the biases. Because again, I go back to, have we actually taken the time to set the expectations with our functional leaders? Have they adopted those expectations and behaviors? And are they therefore now better informed so that they can see how food safety fits into the overall success of our business every day? So I think, is it a struggle? Yeah, probably. But you know what? I think it's an evolution. It's as we've seen over the last 7 years, we're evolving on this topic of culture and food safety, and we're getting better at it. Now we're at the stage where we need to get those functional leaders at the table so that they can take those expectations, run with them, and we can therefore define KPIs and measures that help give them feedback on their behaviors, as opposed to customer complaints or something else that doesn't really make it for them. I think I was just rambling a little bit there, Jim, but sorry.
No, I'm following along. This is perfect. Yeah, because again, this is a cultural discussion, and you might have. I just got a question here from Kathleen. Would you say older and more established food companies typically have greater food safety culture maturity percentages compared with smaller, less established companies?
Thank you, Kathleen. Great question. We see no correlation between size of company to how mature it is. We don't see any correlation to risk profile. So is it a high risk product or low risk product to their maturity scores? And we don't see any correlation between age of organization to their maturity score either. And I think it's if you dive into organizational culture, it can be explained, right? Because it's a little bit back to the stats I showed in the beginning. High performing culture versus a not high performing culture has a much higher revenue or better people retention. It's all down to the culture, the organizational culture that leaders decide to have in their organization. And some very new, very young cultures have very strong food safety performance because leaders that set the tone for those cultures decided that that was important to them. Some old companies get in terrible, terrible trouble because their leaders have a long time ago not included food safety, and now they have to change. And we all know how we feel about change.
That's where I was going. That's right. Yes.
So yeah, good question though. Really good question. So be open-minded to when you go and assess your cultures or when you look at where you are at today on the maturity model. We encourage anybody to grab a hold of our maturity model, download it from our website, and do with it whatever you want. But one of the exercises that works well with leadership teams and also frontline team members, and give them a copy of the model, give them a week to review. It is a little dense, there's a lot in it. And then have them just put a cross as for where they think they are at today. Where's your business at today? Come together as a team and then compare notes. It's a simple exercise that you can do tomorrow where it drives a conversation of why do we see things different. And it also helps you, if you're the food safety and quality leaders, to say, okay, now I have a better understanding of where we're at today and therefore what we should be doing next. So simple exercise.
That's great. And again, you can compare notes and kind of see how off you are. It goes back to that point you made about being biased. You think you're more mature than you actually are. And when you actually see where you are, holy moly, we've got to change now. And it puts that bias, like you were saying, bias causes the silos. And the example you gave was, hey, sales are down, right? I got to focus on sales, not food safety, not food safety. But at the end of the day, there's a dotted line to that financial performance or to other elements that the business needs to track. So yeah, excellent. Excellent point. I want to make sure that I get your information up on the screen so everybody can look at your website, download some of those materials. Here's Loan's information, her phone number, her email address. Obviously, we're here to answer your questions. So please, please do send those our way. I want to thank you, Loan. This has been really, really insightful. We obviously are able to continue this discussion. We've had you on before. The 5 keys to better building food safety culture is actually based on a presentation you gave earlier. We have a lot of fantastic stuff straight from Dr. Loan Jespersen, and we hope you come back soon, Loan, because like I said, this conversation is continuing. We're continuously building that culture as we're evolving our business. And we need those constant reminders and tips.
I would be happy to share again. I mean, we're all in this together, and we have a very simple mission at Cultivate to eradicate foodborne illness, one culture at a time. So anything you need, let us know.
Excellent. Well, have a great rest of your day, Loan, and everybody who's attending today. We hope to see you on our next Beyond Compliance. Look out for those notices shortly, and we will send you the replay of this presentation so you can review it with your teams. So have a good rest of your day, everybody. We'll see you soon.
Bye.